Welcome back to The Change Physician. I'm Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host from the West Coast, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. And we're here with not Saturday, but Sunday salutations, just to share what's been going on in the podcast and any thoughts or events that we feel like sharing with the audience. If you don't know what The Change Physician is all about, you can go to thechangephysician.com and join, whether you're a physician or a physician ally. And we'd love to have you there. Sometimes we send an email or give an update on what's going on, but you can always, usually Saturdays, I'd say, is our typical meeting time, usually 12 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Central is generally when we show up live. So you can always join us there. Otherwise, you can watch it replays on Facebook, and we share some updated episodes or little clips in our Instagram. So how you doing?
I am well. I was just commenting before we started. I feel a little bit tired, and
yes.
It's just a little bit tired, and part of it is because I didn't sleep super well last night, which is thankfully it's not something that happens all the time anymore. I used to have a lot of problems with insomnia, and I don't really have that. It was like when you have a problem like something that's a pain.
Mm-hmm.
You oftentimes don't realize it's not really there until something happens, and I always thought this was really fascinating because if you, particularly when we were, you were doing like clinical pain, it becomes all this all-encompassing thing.
Yeah.
And it becomes very difficult to notice the cessation of a thing. Right. But that's what the goal is to not notice it so that it becomes less and less prominent over time. Right. That you're not grabbing all this attention, and it has to do with predictive processing, all this stuff. But anyway, so like sleeping, it's I just literally thought about it, like, oh my God, I've been actually sleeping really, really well for a while, like a long time now. And anyway, so that is a contributor, is I didn't sleep very good last night. So instead of being a norm, that's a abnormal thing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I heard, it was a certain context, I won't go into detail, but I heard another physician that was really glad to hear that they were sharing this kind of information with patients, but kind of related to what you're saying, that you've got, it's funny, these interconnections like mood, emotion, sleep, like all of these things are kind of intertwined. And when you're missing sleep, like you can see how like the mood can change, your emotions, all these things can be influenced by the lack of sleep. And obviously sleep's important for a lot of things, your immune system, just efficient, all kinds of things that are important. Sleep is kind of like your rejuvenator, so to speak. But it was interesting because there was an analogy made to help the patient understand how intricate all of these things, how they interplay, and was saying, it's like people who are being like in the military or some kind of, not so great situation. If you really want to get something out of somebody, you keep them up. You don't let them sleep, and they break. And I mean, you probably have a comment about that, but it was a good example of how critical sleep is and how it will impact all these other things. And even in those scenarios too, it's really clear that people don't do well.
Well, I think I wasn't quite. The first thing I thought of when you were talking was sort of like and basic, but really when you look at kind of the buds training for the SEALs and how they keep them up for long periods of time. Yeah. Or you can also look at, this never happens, but fraternity hazing rituals for perhaps a week or two. Yeah. But that, I think what you were actually referring to then also was torture. So because keeping
I didn't
people
use the
awake,
word, but yes.
Well, it's a technique used in interrogation, with the reasoning being as you become less sleep, it is much more difficult to think, to process information, and you're more easily to just basically talk about things that you would normally try to inhibit.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, sleep is a fascinating thing, and for physicians out there, fibromyalgia is. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff about fibromyalgia that I think is being published out there that I don't necessarily agree with, and I don't think is aligned with the science. But the one thing that is relatively consistent is disrupted sleep.
Yeah.
And so one of the targets is always, if you can restore sleep patterns and work towards that, which is hard. Again, I've had a lot of disruptive sleep for 20 plus years. It becomes very, very difficult to do, but it can work wonders. And if you are having have a hard time empathizing with your patients, remember being on call. So we were both pre-duty hours, I think. You were pre-duty hours?
I was right in the middle of it.
Okay.
Actually, the first year of my internship was where they went to 80-hour work week, which didn't happen.
Yeah, I think it was either my last two or my last, I don't remember what, or last one, they had the duty hours and it didn't work. I mean, I remember being in the OR with a neurosurgical resident who'd been on for, I don't know, a long time. Like it was at 9 p.m. at night and he'd been there since like 3 a.m. the day before.
Yeah.
But if you need that sensation when you're post-call, you ache, you can't think.
Get chills.
You get chills. You get this kind of a nausea, sick feeling. That's how I knew if I'm up for, probably about the 30-hour mark, I started getting nauseous.
Yeah.
And so then it starts, oh, wait a second. Okay, wow, it's really significant disrupted sleep. And that actually you feel like crap. And then just extend that out for months and months and months or years and years and years. And it gives you a little bit of appreciation of kind of that syndrome that people can get, of which disrupted sleep is one portion of. Yeah.
I mean, and it's interesting, just the interplay of everything in our health and our life, and just even, with fibromyalgia, like you talk about, you want to optimize sleep, whether they have chronic pain, whether it's fibromyalgia or something else or any other condition. But there's this even exercise and relieving tension from the body. Just there's so many benefits. Exercise, if we could put it in a pill, like we always talk about, exercise and sleep, like it's so incredibly important. And I find it fascinating that I meet these patients. I'll just give an example. Generally speaking, somebody who had multiple allergies, multiple conditions, autoimmune, GERD, IBS, like all of these hyper, like when you think of the nervous system, they're all like the system is hypervigilant. Like it doesn't say it that way on this paperwork, but when I'm talking to the nurse who did all the intake of this information, I just kind of asked, I was like, so, because they're thinking this person's crazy. And I'm like, I don't know how you want to define crazy, but I feel like someone who has had a hypervigilant nervous system for decades, for whatever reason, I told the nurse, I'm like, I try to remain compassionate in these situations because these people are like little canaries in a coal mine. Like the way their bodies respond to whatever stressor, and I suspect probably trauma of some sort and PTSD or something, because they're physically, from whatever psychological trauma they had, they're physically manifesting in a lot of ways. That was she's like, well, I don't try to like diagnose, but fascinating. I went and talked to the patient, lent an ear because she was super worried about anesthesia and all this stuff. And she was going to say, oh, I'm sorry, you need to do your questions. Like, no, let's address get it off your chest. Like, let her get it off, because I know she's also going to think about the things she wants to tell me. And what came of that after I gave, some compassion and she showed appreciation because I listened, it was revealed this person had significant trauma. Nothing on the chart anywhere, but you can see all these manifestations of problems. And I don't know why I felt like saying that, but I feel like we try to call someone crazy, which, maybe it may appear that way.
Well,
but this person's
all
struggling.
Crazy. We're literally all crazy. Really. I mean, humans are just crazy. It's just the degree of crazy that you are really is kind of the key thing. And then there's there's people have frank hallucinations and things like that, but we all have our tweaks and things and
coping.
Look at and how we cope or don't cope. Or I should say how we cope is really, whether you're coping in an effective or ineffective manner.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we are. I mean, I think it's interesting because you can either pathologize everything like we typically do in medicine. We pathologize basically the human condition. And and I'm not saying that things don't need to be treated. What I'm what I do advocate for is the fact that you got to understand that our brains and bodies developed in such a way to allow us to survive.
Yeah.
And so for most of the things that we have pathologized, there was a reason for them.
Mm-hmm.
So like anxiety is a typical one for me. The game changer for me was I was sitting in a lecture. I don't think so. I was thinking, I don't remember what it was. An online lecture, actually. This was years and years and years ago through the what is his name? Herbert Benson's Stress Institute from Harvard. The guy who's like talks about this. I forgot what he talked about. Anyway, but it was a psychiatrist, and he was talking about how the brain like develops. And one of the when you start to look at the ability to predict, so predictive processing, the big thing, and you're kind of using it with machine models and everything. But this ability to then take information now to anticipate what a future scenario is, right? That is the basis of civilization. Without that ability for us to project a future that does not exist and anticipate it and prepare for it, we cannot plant crops. We cannot build things. We cannot function in a world where we're trying to anticipate a future.
Right.
That's also the root of anxiety. Yeah. So anxiety is literally the root of civilization. So now, and that sort of changes the game. If we started saying, well, anxiety is bad. If you're anxious, that's a bad thing. We need to cover it up every time. And instead we go, well, okay, anxiety is a natural human condition that has a purpose. Now, if it is overloaded and it is paralyzing you, now we need to dampen it down, but it's not something that we're going to eliminate completely. That sort of changes the game. Put it into perspective. And when you put the trauma history in, and we know when someone has had significant trauma, the earlier you are, the kind of both the quantity as well as the quality, the degree of trauma that you've experienced as a younger age, there's changes in the brain on how it processes information, and your brain becomes more what I call stress sensitive or threat sensitive, where it sees threats where normal people would not. And the easiest way to kind of explain that is, if you grew up in a really bad neighborhood where there was gang violence all the time, if you heard a loud pop, your default reaction is that's a shooting. Now, if you grew up where I grew up in Corvallis, where it's like relatively one of the safest places, you hear that and you go, whoa, what was that? Did someone pop a tire or whatever, right? It doesn't, your physiology is going to be very, very different based on what your brain has learned over time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing that always, we forget about this stuff. There is a reason why our brains and bodies have developed. And when we look at pain, and we see people with persistent pain, one of the kind of central factors of that, and a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of them, is trauma. Yeah. And instead we call them crazy. It's like, dude, not crazy. Their brains and bodies have developed from the environment that they were subjected to for over years. Yeah. Not to hurt them, not to be horrible, but to keep them safe, and really to keep them safe in the moment at the kind of the cost of long term.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know. It is. I haven't done a lot of talks on this stuff. It is very hard, I think, for some people to kind of step back and say, well, I guess it's easier to say someone's crazy, or they don't want to get better, or they're not trying, or what's the other ones that are just really
they're not, or sometimes like an extension, they're non-compliant. Like,
I hate that word. Yeah, non-compliant.
I'm like, did you talk and ask why, or like try to understand? Like, there's maybe a good reason, you don't even like take the time. It's easier to project outward than to try to understand and be compassionate. And it's harder to, I was going to say, it's harder to do that when you yourself are exhausted and overwhelmed and in an environment where you don't have the time to do this. Or lack of healthcare. Yeah. You made me think of, as physicians listening, is it is really hard for someone who's embedded in the medical system, and I speak for myself too, to recognize that you are so desensitized to so much stuff, for better or for worse. We do partially for survival and just repetition, and we're just acclimated, but it doesn't always serve us to be that way, because you don't realize that people not in the system, like anyone who's not in the medical system, will have normal like emotional reactions to stuff, or have normal fears and anticipatory anxiety about what they're about to undergo, whether it's a procedure, anesthesia, just being in the office, who knows what they're going to do to me? Like, who knows? Like, or not knowing if this, mass is a cancer. Like, there's so much that goes on psychologically within the patients that is normal, but we have desensitized ourselves to a lot of stuff. And so we seem like we're not compassionate. And the reason I'm saying all this is because we're talking about anxiety and stress and traumas. We induce that on patients too, whether we realize it or not, by how we have a lack of, connection, whether you want to blame it on the insurance companies not having time to spend with your patient and giving them the, the words and the connection and the space to have, healthy conversations about what's going on with their overall health. But I feel like we have to be more, if we can see through the eyes of the patient and recognize the patient is trying to be safe, and not a lot of what we do is safe. And we actually harm patients, and they've heard stories. And I've had patients when they feel like it's safe to share it with me, which I know that this doesn't always happen for these same patients with other people. And they share what's happened, or they lost someone they know to some negligent behavior and all this stuff. Like, I think we have to be really cognizant of that and aware and respectful of that, and know that there's a lot of anxiety, even though you might know it deep down there, but you don't really acknowledge it for the patient. But anyway, any thoughts?
Oh, I always have lots and lots of thoughts, but
I know I always say it like that.
But part of it is just, it's just really hard to be a physician. To be a really good physician is really, really hard. It is so much easier to be a bad one. I mean, really, it is.
It's an interesting comment, right?
It is. I mean, okay, so if you care, the harder it is, and particularly when we've talked about like the incentivization of the system. That's the Charlie Munger quote that you get the behaviors that you incentivize, right? Doesn't matter anything else what you want to do, but whatever you incentivize, you get. And there's, when you look at the incentives in healthcare and how it's designed, it's optimized to do those incentives. Yeah. And that incentive is not good medicine. Like there is no incentive in there. And so, if you don't care and you just look at your patients as widgets, and you are looking at how you can optimize and maximize your RVUs because that's how your pay structure is, and people do that and they make a ton of money, that's not good medicine, but it makes the system well. But if you were trying to provide humanistic care and really see the person as a person, and then realize all the contributors that go into their experience, how their constructed experience, of which all these symptoms, as well as these objective findings, come together and to create, that's really hard. Yeah. Look at pain. So to have this kind of conversation and talk about, neurodevelopment and threat, and how trauma histories actually amplify to try to keep your body safe in the now, and how that then predisposes you to increased stress, and how that increased stress then is reflected in your physiology. And so you get this variety of symptoms, including insomnia, maybe abdominal pain, nausea, fatigue, difficulty thinking, fuzzy thinking, different parts of your body may ache. And to make that constellation of symptoms make sense, that's hard. And particularly when they're being told 6 other times, oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're making this up. Oh, that other doctor said this, but I looked and I saw some wrinkles in your spine at your L4-5 over there. And that's where all your pain that you have all over your body somehow is coming from your zygapophyseal joint at L4-5 on the left. It's ridiculous, know, and I don't know. It's we're just kind of voicing the frustrations here. But if you guys are out there and you're trying to provide good care, I'm definitely saying don't do that. But recognize that it is difficult, and there's a lot of things that are up against you to do this. Yeah. And the first thing you need to do is take care of yourself, and to structure your life in such a way that allows you to stay safe and sane, and then do the best that you can. Yeah. And sometimes that necessitates a change. Sometimes you're going to change environments, change practices, develop a new practice. Your income may change, but you got to do what is right rather than what is easy. That's one of my other favorite Harry Potter quotes, when he's like, dark and difficult times lie ahead, Harry. And then times will come where you have to make the choice between what is right and what is easy. And so often we default to the easy over and over and over again. And then we wonder why, healthcare the way it is, or the world is the way it is because we always try to do, the easy is easy, but the right is often really hard.
Yeah, I have to make a comment about easy versus hard, or, what we're talking about earlier about if someone's in pain post-op. Okay, that's pretty reasonable to think. It may seem a little bit more than what you typically see some patients, but you don't know if this underlying nervous system has trauma and their experience of sensory input from whatever you just cut on that you didn't block, and their underlying anxiety is magnifying their pain experience, which, if you don't know what that means, maybe you should go look at the pain course online that Kevin did and learn from that. But if there are any surgeons or any other physicians, and of course the people that need to hear this are probably not going to hear this, but don't just call someone crazy and that they're drug seeking post-op in a recovery room, and you're ignoring them and you're saying basically not compassionate things at all. Sometimes it may not be the IV medicine that they need as much as you just tending to them, at least acknowledging their pain, whatever you believe about it. But I mean, the fact that this stuff goes on, we talk about it's easy to be a bad physician. This stuff happens, and the patient may not hear it, but it happens, and nurses and physicians are both guilty of this. And it's the recovery room is not the time to necessarily teach a patient about modern pain science, but you can understand the pain science and approach it in a way that makes the most sense. At least that's my take on it, Kevin.
When you have somebody who's in an acute distress,
yes,
the goal is to help them feel safe.
Yes.
That's literally the key.
Yeah.
So if you I hate drug seeking. I hate that term. Like, that's what I have so many triggers, but that's a big trigger to me.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody's out there like, oh yeah, I just want to do heroin all the time. Oh, I just want your OxyContin. Despite the mythos, they're using that to do something. And so the terminology is instead of drug seeking, they're distressed seekers, right? Mm-hmm. And they're seeking to alleviate that distress.
Yeah.
So in a post-operative, what you're trying to do is help them feel safe, help them to have the expectations of what a normal recovery would be, how to answer those concerns, minimize the fears. If you're a surgeon and you have somebody who's post-operative, minimize the fear, dude. That's like the most important factor, or one of the most factors that you can do. How can you make them feel safe, and how can you eliminate the fears that they may be having? There's a goal for prehab where, give them realistic expectations of the course, because the more you understand how things are going to be, the less threat there is associated with that. Yeah. But it's so much easier to label people. Oh, they're drug seeking. Oh, they're drug seeking. Oh, they're crazy. Oh, they're this. And I do understand that, because when you're sleep deprived and you're stressed out and you're having a hard time and your clinic's behind, guess what your default is going to be?
Yeah.
The easy.
Yeah.
And it happens to all of us, but the more you recognize that you're defaulting to it, at least you have aware, there's a chance that you can interrupt that and hopefully change the care that you're delivering. And if not, step back and take care of yourself so that you can go back in to the foray.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we almost did an episode right there. I think these are all important conversations and topics. Let me just pull up what this past week on our podcast. Let's see, we're now, officially Happy October.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. You're crazy.
I am crazy.
I think episode 256 this past Thursday. Are you, or do you have fun? That was an interesting conversation. We're bantering back and forth about in personal lives on the podcast, like if we're fun or do we have fun, how you can have fun, all that stuff. So if you missed that one, go back and check that one out. Any comments?
Nope.
About that? Okay. Anything you'd like to share before we take an exit?
No, other than happy October. And we are now 3/4 of the year done, which just blows my mind. And this month will be over, and then it's going to be Thanksgiving, and then it's going to be Christmas, and then we're going to start a new year.
I know. So, and then I'm going to turn 50
happy 2024. Also. I guess that's what I should be saying, right? Because it'll be here before we know it.
I know. Crazy. All right. Well, take us out then there, Kevin.
Well, thank you for joining us for Sunday Salutations with the Change Physician podcast. As always, you can drop us a line at drkevin@thechangephysician.com. And I was going to say you can join us next week. This is a weird month. There's some scheduling things that are going to be happening this month. So probably, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so, I think this Saturday maybe we'll be up and live.
Up and live. Oh, you know what? I'm not going to be here this Saturday. We might have to do Sunday Salutations next week because I am presenting at the Oregon Pain Summit this weekend.
Oh yeah, that's right. So
so join us next Sunday for Sunday Salutations.
Yes.
And until next time, stay well.
Take care.